It starts as something you might almost miss. A flicker of movement in the dust, a shadow shifting behind the acacia trees. The kind of thing that, if you weren't paying attention, you'd write off as the wind, or a trick of the afternoon light baking off the savanna floor. But this was no trick. This was 4.5 tons of African bull elephant, and it had decided that the battered Land Cruiser, bumping along the red dirt track of Kruger National Park, was something it needed to follow. Not approach, not investigate, not charge once and retreat. Follow, for 4 hours, across open plains, through river crossings, along the ridgelines where the marula trees grow thick and the grass runs golden in the late dry season sun. 4 hours of one of the largest land animals on Earth, moving with quiet, deliberate, utterly unnerving intent behind a vehicle full of people who were running out of options and running low on fuel. What unfolded that afternoon in the Lowveld of South Africa is one of the most extraordinary documented encounters between a human group and a wild elephant ever recorded. It raises questions that cut right to the heart of what we understand about elephant psychology, about memory, about the strange and sometimes terrifying overlap between human lives and the lives of these enormous, intelligent, emotionally complex animals. And what happened when the elephant finally caught them is something that nobody in that vehicle will ever forget. If you want to understand what it means to be in the presence of a truly wild elephant, the first thing you have to let go of is every image you've absorbed from wildlife documentaries where elephants move peacefully through golden light while gentle piano music plays. That version of elephants is real. It is also incomplete. The African bush elephant, Loxodonta africana, is the largest land animal on Earth. A mature bull can stand 4 meters at the shoulder and weigh between 5 and 7 tons. Its brain is the largest of any land mammal, roughly 3 times the volume of a human brain, with a cerebral cortex of extraordinary complexity. Elephants show clear evidence of self-recognition, of grief, of long-term memory, of strategic planning, of what researchers cautiously describe as empathy. They also have a capacity for something that researchers find harder to name, but which anyone who has spent serious time in the bush will recognize immediately. They hold grudges. They remember faces. They remember vehicles. They remember sounds, smells, and places across spans of years and even decades. An elephant that was darted by researchers in one location has been observed responding with clear agitation to the smell of the same tranquilizer compound years later, in a completely different area. An elephant that was harassed by vehicles with a specific engine note has been documented responding to that same engine sound with threat displays long after the original incident. What this means, practically, is that when a bull elephant decides to follow you, it is not doing so by accident. It is not confused. It is not simply curious in the way a young calf might be curious about a bright-colored hat. It has a reason. And the group of people in that Land Cruiser on that particular afternoon in Kruger were about to spend 4 hours trying to figure out what that reason was. The encounter began at roughly 2 in the afternoon. The vehicle, a standard open-sided safari cruiser carrying a guide, a tracker, and 6 tourists, had stopped near a waterhole on the eastern side of the park to watch a small breeding herd of elephants drinking. This is standard safari behavior. You park at a respectful distance, you keep the engine running low, you watch. The herd numbered around 12 individuals, females, subadults, juveniles. The classic matriarchal family group that most people picture when they think of elephants. What the group had not initially noticed was the single bull elephant standing in the shade of a stand of leadwood trees, approximately 200 meters to the north. He had been there for a while, standing very still, in the way that large male elephants sometimes do when they're in a period of must, the extraordinary hormonal state that overtakes adult bull elephants periodically throughout their adult lives and transforms already formidable animals into something considerably more volatile. Must. The word comes from an Urdu term meaning intoxicated. It is an accurate description. During must, a bull elephant's testosterone levels surge to between 40 and 60 times their normal concentration. The temporal glands on the sides of the head, located between the eye and the ear, swell and begin secreting a dark, viscous fluid that runs continuously down the face, staining the skin and filling the air with a sharp, pungent odor that can be detected by both other elephants and by humans with a sensitive nose, particularly noticeable on a still day. The animal urinates almost continuously, dribbling a strong-smelling fluid that stains the insides of the hind legs green. It walks with a distinctive rolling gait, chin tucked, tusks angled down, head swinging. Everything about a musk bull communicates the same message. I am at maximum biological intensity. Do not test me. Other bull elephants, even larger ones, typically avoid musk males entirely. They defer without contest. Even dominant bulls, animals that would normally hold their ground in any hierarchy dispute, will give way to a musk bull rather than engage. The guide noticed the temporal gland secretion when he lifted his binoculars. He noticed the wet staining on the hind legs. He estimated the bull at somewhere between 35 and 45 years old, well into his physical prime, with tusks heavy enough to angle slightly downward from their own weight. He noted these things, shared them quietly with the tracker, and the two men exchanged a look. They kept their eyes on the herd. They kept their peripheral attention on the bull. For a while, everything was calm. The breeding herd finished drinking and moved off to the south in that characteristic elephantine procession, the matriarch leading, the younger animals clustering close, the rear guard occasionally pausing to look back. The sound of their passage, the soft rumble of low-frequency communication that humans can barely hear but feel as a faint pressure in the sternum, faded into the distance. The bull did not follow them. He stayed where he was, standing in the leadwood shade. And now, with the herd gone, his attention appeared to shift. He turned toward the vehicle. The guide did not panic. He had 22 years of experience in the bush, 17 of them in Kruger specifically. He had dealt with elephant encounters more times than he could accurately count. He understood the difference between an alert posture and an intention to charge. He understood that musk bulls required additional space and significantly more caution, but that they could still be managed with the right combination of positioning, engine use, and calm behavior. He started the vehicle and moved slowly away from the waterhole, heading back onto the main dirt track. The bull followed, not at a run, not at a charge, at a walk. A purposeful, even, steady walk that covered ground with deceptive speed. Because at full stride, an elephant's walk is approximately 7 kilometers per hour, which is faster than most humans jog, and this bull was committing to the pace without apparent effort. The guide increased the vehicle's speed to 15 kilometers per hour. The track was rough and lined with vegetation. He could go faster, but not safely. The bull maintained contact. This is the point at which the encounter shifted from unusual to genuinely alarming, because a single following charge, even a determined one, is something guides train for. There are protocols. You accelerate, you put distance between yourself and the animal. The animal eventually stops, because elephants, for all their size and motivation, do not typically sustain a full charge over very long distances. They charge, they make their point, they stop. The situation resolves. What does not resolve easily is when the elephant simply follows without charging at all. Because then, you cannot accelerate hard without risking losing control on rough ground. You cannot stop without allowing the animal to close the gap entirely. You cannot turn around and go back the way you came because the animal is behind you. You are, functionally, being herded, and you do not know toward what. The guide made a radio call to the park's management center. He reported his position, the condition of the bull, the direction of movement. He requested whether there were any known problematic individuals in the area, any recent reports of unusual behavior from this part of the park. The response came back with a careful silence before the answer. There had been reports, yes. Over the past several weeks, there had been a bull in this general area, displaying unusual persistence in following vehicles, not attacking them, just following. Long-distance following. Rangers had attempted to observe and document the behavior, but had been, themselves, forced to keep moving. Nobody knew why. The elephant behind the Land Cruiser was now close enough that the passengers in the rear seats could see the temporal gland secretion without binoculars. could see the steady wet stain on the hind legs, could see the way the massive head swung with each stride, the ears not fully spread in aggression, but held slightly out from the head, reading the air, reading the space ahead. Could see the eyes. People who have been in close proximity to a musk-bull elephant consistently report the same thing about the eyes. There is something in them that registers as active intelligence, not the blank gaze of a reptile, not even the reactive intelligence of a domestic dog, something older and stranger than either, a quality of attention that makes the back of your human brain, the very old part that has been afraid of large predators for millions of years, activate every alarm it possesses simultaneously. One of the tourists, a woman traveling with her partner on what was meant to be their anniversary safari, later described it this way: "I have never in my life felt so specifically noticed by a wild animal, not looked at in a general way, specifically noticed, like being recognized." The vehicle kept moving, the bull kept following. 1 hour passed. The guide took a series of turns, attempting to create additional distance without ever moving so fast on the rough tracks that control of the vehicle became uncertain. The elephant tracked each turn with what appeared, from the vehicle, like complete knowledge of where they were going. There was no confusion in its movements, no casting around, no hesitation at junctions. It simply continued in the direction the vehicle had gone, arriving at each turning point and proceeding without pause. At the 90-minute mark, the guide made a second radio call. His fuel level was becoming a factor. The vehicle was not empty, but the detour route he had been taking, combined with the additional engine load of maintaining a constant low-speed crawl on rough ground, was consuming more than normal. He was advised to make for the nearest ranger station, which was approximately 23 kilometers away, via a route that would take them through a section of denser vegetation before opening out onto a larger main road, where additional ranger vehicles could be positioned to assist. He turned for the ranger station. The bull turned with him. 2 hours. By this point, the dynamic inside the vehicle had become something that is difficult to fully communicate through language alone. 6 tourists who had boarded a safari vehicle that morning, expecting the standard pleasures of the African bush, watching lions on a kill from a safe distance, following a leopard through long grass, the magnificent but essentially passive experience of observing wildlife from inside the protected bubble of a vehicle. They had not expected this. There is a specific quality of sustained fear that is different from the sharp, explosive fear of a sudden charge or an unexpected encounter. Sustained fear, maintained over hours rather than seconds, does something different to the human nervous system. It does not peak and resolve. It accumulates. It changes the quality of your attention. Everything sharpens and slows simultaneously. Sounds from outside the vehicle, a branch breaking, a bird flushing suddenly from undergrowth, become enormously significant. The mind continuously runs calculations. How far back is it now? Has it gotten closer? Is the engine sound different? What happens if we stop? What happens when it catches us? The guide and tracker maintained outward calm in the way that experienced bush professionals do, because they understand that their passengers' fear is real, and managed panic in an open vehicle near a musk-bull elephant is one of the more dangerous possible outcomes. They spoke in low, steady voices. They explained what they knew. They were honest about what they did not know. "He's not charging," the guide said more than once. "If he wanted to charge, he would have charged by now." This was true, and it was also, in a peculiar way, the most unsettling thing about the entire situation. An elephant that charges is an elephant expressing an emotion you understand. Get away. You're too close. You've threatened something. The charge is aggressive communication. It means something legible. An elephant that simply follows, for hours, at a steady pace, expressing no clear aggression, but also no sign of losing interest, is communicating something that the human brain finds much harder to decode. And the thing that people cannot stop doing when they are in the presence of something they cannot decode is fill the silence with every possible interpretation, including the worst ones. What was this bull doing? What did it want? The theories running through the vehicle over those 2 hours ranged from the scientific to the desperate. Maybe the vehicle looked like something it had seen before. Maybe the smell of the engine oil or exhaust was similar to something in its memory. Maybe it had been in conflict with vehicles before and was now tracking this one out of some persistent territorial logic. Maybe it was in deep must, and the vehicle simply fell within whatever zone of attention its hormonal state was generating. Maybe it recognized someone. This last idea sounds extreme, but elephant visual recognition is not a trivial ability. Research at the Amboseli Elephant Research Project in Kenya has documented elephants correctly identifying specific individual humans among groups, recognizing researchers they had not seen for periods of years, distinguishing between people wearing the same color clothing based on subtle differences in gait and build. They can distinguish between the voices of individual humans, between tribal groups that pose historical threat and those that do not, between vehicles by engine note. If this elephant had a specific recognition event connected to this vehicle or to someone in it, it was not beyond the documented capabilities of the species. 2.5 hours. 3. The bush thickened and then opened. The vehicle crested a low ridge, and for a moment, the landscape spread out below them, golden and vast, the low veld stretching away toward the Lebombo Mountains on the eastern horizon, Mozambique beyond them, the enormous, unchanging expanse of the African interior in all directions. Behind them, the bull emerged from the tree line at a walk. 3.5 hours. The guide made a third radio call. He was now in radio range of the ranger station. There was a ranger vehicle waiting approximately 4 kilometers ahead on the main road. They had a strategy. The Land Cruiser would approach the junction, and the ranger vehicle would position itself between the Land Cruiser and the bull, using horn, engine, and if necessary, a warning shot fired into the air to break the elephant's line of pursuit. It was a good plan. The bull had other ideas. Because at roughly the 3-hour and 40-minute mark, something changed. The guide had been watching his mirrors continuously, calculating distance and speed with the practiced eye of someone who has spent a very long time in the company of large and potentially dangerous animals. The bull had been maintaining what appeared to be a consistent following distance, close enough to stay in contact, but not so close as to be in immediate striking range. And then the distance began to decrease, not dramatically, not all at once, but the gap that had remained roughly constant for hours was now, measurably, shrinking. The bull was walking faster, or the vehicle, navigating a section of particularly rough and rocky track, was moving slower. The arithmetic of it, regardless of cause, produced the same result. The elephant was closing. The guide did not announce this to the passengers. He pressed the accelerator further and winced at the impact as the vehicle bounced hard through a series of ruts. He heard something clatter loose underneath. He kept going. The gap continued to close. At 3 hours and 55 minutes, on a section of track that curved around a dense stand of mopane woodland, the Land Cruiser rounded a bend, and the guide saw, simultaneously, 2 things. First, the main road, approximately 300 meters ahead, with the ranger vehicle visible and waiting. Second, the bend in the track behind him, which the bull rounded at exactly the same moment, now no more than 50 meters behind the Land Cruiser, and closing, and for the first time in 4 hours, the ears were fully spread. The head was up. The posture had shifted entirely. The 4-hour follow was over. The bull was coming. What the passengers saw in the next 30 seconds has been described, by each of the 6 of them independently, in terms that share a consistent quality of unreality. The sense that time did something strange, that individual moments stretched out and became very detailed and very clear, while the overall sequence seemed to happen almost too fast to process. The guide floored the accelerator. The Land Cruiser lurched forward across the remaining rough ground, losing traction briefly, finding it again. The tracker grabbed the roof bar with both hands and turned to watch behind them, his face absolutely still. From the vehicle, there was a sound, a deep, resonant, furious sound, the kind of vocalization that registers in the body before the brain processes it as sound at all. The elephant was running. An elephant at full run covers ground at up to 25 kilometers per hour. In that 50-meter gap, across that terrain, in those conditions, It had perhaps 12 to 15 seconds before it reached the vehicle. The Land Cruiser hit the main road with a crash that threw everyone forward against whatever they were holding. The Ranger vehicle was already moving, angling across the road behind them, horn blaring. The driver of the Ranger vehicle was experienced. He came in at an angle, not blocking the bull's path entirely, which would have been a provocation, but presenting a new obstacle, a new set of information, something that the bull's attention had to process in the midst of its charge. The bull stopped. Not immediately, not from nothing. It went from full run to a stiff-legged skidding halt that threw up a cloud of red dust and dried grass, the immense body absorbing momentum in a way that made every person watching feel the ground vibrate. It stood, ears fully spread, trunk raised, the temporal gland secretion vivid and dark on the face, the rage, or whatever it was, visible in every line of the massive body. The Ranger vehicle held its position. The horn continued. The Ranger stood up in the vehicle and shouted, a sharp, commanding shout, the kind of sound and posture that experienced Rangers use to communicate to an elephant. You have gone far enough. Stop. The bull screamed. This is not a metaphor. African elephants produce a vocalization at moments of extreme agitation that genuinely deserves the word scream. It starts below the range of clear human hearing and moves through it and above it simultaneously, the kind of sound that would stop every animal within a kilometer of it in its tracks. Certain notes in it are understood, across species lines, as signifying something terrible and immediate. The passengers in the Land Cruiser, which had continued moving down the main road and was now approximately 200 meters away, heard it and felt it land on their nervous systems like a physical impact. And then the bull was still. He stood there, in the settling dust on the edge of the main road, flanked by the mopane trees, surrounded by the vast, indifferent landscape of the park, ears slowly folding back, trunk lowering. The Ranger vehicle moved slowly back, maintaining the gap. The bull made one more short mock charge, a single lunging step forward that sent the dust up again, and then stopped. He watched the Land Cruiser disappear down the road. He stood there for a long time. When the Rangers returned later that day to check the area, the bull had gone. He was not at the waterhole. He was not in the mopane woodland. He had moved off into the interior of the park, away from the roads, away from the vehicles, and he had simply disappeared into the enormous landscape the way elephants have always ultimately disappeared, swallowed by the bush, leaving only tracks and crushed vegetation and the memory of an encounter that everyone who experienced it would spend a long time trying to understand. So, what had just happened? The question is not as simple as it sounds, and it is not a question that has a clean, definitive answer, but it has several possible answers, each of which reveals something important about elephant biology and behavior, and about the nature of the encounters between humans and these animals in the modern African landscape. The first and most straightforward interpretation involves must. A bull in deep must is not the same animal as that same bull outside of must, any more than a human being in the grip of an extreme hormonal or neurological event is entirely the same as their baseline self. The elevated testosterone, the agitation, the heightened territorial and competitive drive, the persistence, all of these can produce behavior that seems, from a human perspective, to lack the normal rules of engagement that we expect from wild animals. Must bulls challenge, pursue, and sometimes kill other elephants. They challenge and sometimes attack rhinos, buffalo, and other large animals that they would entirely ignore outside of must. They respond to stimuli, including vehicles, in ways that are abnormal for their species. The following behavior, maintained over 4 hours, could be understood as the expression of a must-driven territorial drive applied to a stimulus, the vehicle, that the bull had identified as belonging in his space, or as threatening something he was focused on, and pursued with the relentless, hormonally amplified intensity that must produces. This explanation is scientifically coherent. It is also incomplete, because must bulls have been extensively studied in environments like Kruger, Amboseli, the Addo Elephant National Park, and numerous other sites, and the behavior documented in this encounter, the sustained 4-hour follow at a consistent pace, without a charge, apparently tracking specific turns and directional changes, is not standard must behavior. It is unusual, even accounting for the amplifying effects of must. The second interpretation involves recognition. This is the one that researchers, who were later briefed on the encounter, found most interesting and most difficult to either confirm or dismiss. 2 years before this encounter, there had been an incident in a neighboring section of the park involving a bull elephant of similar description, large, heavily tusked, estimated age in the mid-30s to 40s, believed to be in must, and a safari vehicle. The details of that earlier incident are incomplete, but what is known is that it involved a vehicle stopping closer to the bull than was appropriate, a situation that escalated briefly before the vehicle was able to move away, and that in the course of the incident, the vehicle had been struck by the elephant, a side impact from the tusks that left distinctive damage to the body panels. The guide of the vehicle in this encounter had been the guide in that earlier incident. The vehicle itself was the same model and color, though not the same individual vehicle. There is no way to confirm that the bull in this encounter was the same individual as in the earlier incident. There is no way to confirm that any recognition event had occurred, but the behavior, the specific, directed, apparently purposeful following of this vehicle and its occupants over 4 hours is more consistent with recognition-based motivation than with random must aggression. Elephant researchers at several institutions have gone on record in subsequent discussions of this case to note that the behavioral profile, specifically the consistency of following without charging, the apparent tracking of the vehicle's directional changes, the escalation to charging only when the vehicle was approaching an exit point that would remove it from the elephant's range, is consistent with what you might predict from an animal with a stored memory of a prior aversive encounter with a specific stimulus, pursuing that stimulus in a state of elevated arousal and attempting to prevent its escape. In plain language, the elephant may have remembered, may have been waiting, may have followed for 4 hours because it was not finished with whatever the first encounter had started. This is not a comfortable conclusion. It is also not a surprising one to anyone who has studied elephant cognition and behavior seriously. An elephant named Voortrekker in Addo Elephant National Park in the Eastern Cape was documented attacking vehicles at a specific section of Park Road for over a decade. Researchers eventually connected the behavior to an incident in which the animal had been involved in a vehicle collision at that location in which a member of its family group had been seriously injured. The elephant was not targeting random vehicles. It appeared to be targeting the location and type of stimulus it associated with the original trauma. An elephant in Zimbabwe, studied by behavioral researchers, demonstrated a persistent and highly specific aggressive response to one individual researcher, but not to other researchers of similar physical description, and not to the same researcher wearing different clothing, suggesting a level of individual identification capability that went beyond simple visual categorization. Elephants in Karen Payne's long-term research in Amboseli have been observed returning to the sites where family members died, months and years later, touching the bones with their trunks, standing in apparent stillness that researchers have noted looks, in every measurable behavioral parameter, like grief. They are not simple animals. They are not animals that simply react to immediate stimuli and forget. They are animals with minds that hold the past, that connect experience across time, that orient themselves in the world through a continuous narrative of memory and association, that is, if not identical to human consciousness, then far closer to it than we were comfortable admitting even 20 years ago. What this means for human-elephant coexistence in places like Kruger, where the population of both species and the interactions between them are increasing year by year, is something that park managers, wildlife researchers, and safari operators are actively grappling with. The Kruger National Park covers almost 20,000 square kilometers. It contains one of the world's largest managed elephant populations, currently estimated at around 20,000 animals, a number that park management actively works to regulate, because at that population density, elephants cause significant ecological change, consuming and destroying vegetation faster than it can regenerate, altering water sources, competing with other species in ways that cascade through the entire ecosystem. The human interface with that population is managed through a complex system of road access, vehicle regulations, minimum approach distances, ranger protocols, and ongoing research. But the system is not perfect, and the encounters it is designed to prevent still happen, because the landscape is enormous, and the animals within it are mobile, and because the fundamental dynamic between humans and elephants in a shared landscape is one that has never been fully resolved. African elephants have had complex relationships with humans for as long as both species have existed in the same geography. For most of that history, those relationships were characterized by mutual avoidance. Elephants are intelligent enough to understand danger and to modify their behavior in response to it, and for most of human history, humans were dangerous to elephants in ways that kept the large bulls particularly wary and distant. Then came the era of commercial ivory hunting, which killed elephants in numbers that stagger the imagination. In the 19th century alone, conservatively estimated, somewhere between 60 and 100,000 elephants per year were killed for ivory across the African continent. By the early 20th century, populations that had numbered in the millions had been reduced to tens of thousands. The species was not quite brought to extinction, but it came close enough that the populations alive today carry the genetic legacy of that bottleneck, and they carry something else as well: the trauma. This is not anthropomorphization. It is a documented behavioral and neurological reality. Research published in the journal Nature and in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B has demonstrated measurable differences in stress hormone profiles, in startle responses, in social behavior, between elephant populations that experienced high levels of culling or poaching within living memory, including memory transmitted through social learning, and populations that did not. Elephants in areas that experienced heavy poaching show elevated baseline cortisol levels, altered family group cohesion, higher rates of aberrant aggression, and reduced reproductive success. Young elephants, who grew up without elder family members to provide social guidance because those elders were killed, show behavioral dysregulation that persists throughout their lives. Without the wisdom of experienced matriarchs, without the social modeling of calm adult bulls navigating the world with appropriate confidence and caution, young elephants grow up with something that, in human psychology, would be described as complex trauma responses. The orphan elephant crisis in Africa, which has produced multiple large-scale rescue and rehabilitation operations, including the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, and numerous smaller programs, is partly a conservation response and partly a recognition of what happens to individual animals and to populations when the social fabric that elephants rely on is destroyed by human violence. And yet here is where the story becomes even more complicated, and in some ways more hopeful. Because elephants are also capable of adjusting, of learning new relationships, of building, over time, an understanding of humans that is based on current experience rather than historical trauma. The bull elephants of Amboseli, studied continuously since the 1970s by Cynthia Moss and her team, demonstrate across the documented decades a gradual shift in their relationship with research vehicles. The early records are full of threat displays, of bulls challenging the research vehicles, of interactions characterized by high levels of mutual wariness. The later records show animals that have learned to distinguish research vehicles from other vehicles, that approach without threat, that occasionally seek proximity in ways that researchers interpret, cautiously, as curiosity or social interest. This learning is not simple conditioning, it is something more sophisticated. It is the integration of repeated experience into a revised model of what humans and human vehicles represent in the elephant's world. It is, in other words, the kind of cognitive updating that we associate with animals of genuine intelligence. Elephants in Botswana's Okavango Delta, where photographic tourism has been established and stable for decades, frequently behave with a composure around vehicles that is almost entirely unlike the behavior of the same species in areas where human contact has been negative or unpredictable. They go about their lives, their feeding and bathing and social interactions and play, with vehicles present at distances that would have been unthinkable in a context of historical threat. This is what peaceful coexistence looks like when the conditions for it are maintained consistently over time. Which brings us back to the question of what can be done. The encounter in Kruger ended without injury. The guide's experience and the ranger backup made the difference. The bull retreated and disappeared. Nobody was hurt. In one sense, the story ends there, and ends relatively well. But across the range states of the African elephant, a much larger story is playing out, with considerably less happy outcomes. Human-elephant conflict is one of the most significant conservation and humanitarian challenges in sub-Saharan Africa, as elephant populations, where protected, have begun to recover from the worst of the poaching era, and as human populations continue to expand, and agricultural land pushes deeper into areas that were historically elephant range, the interface between the two species is producing an escalating series of confrontations that are devastating for both sides. Elephants raid agricultural fields, consuming and destroying crops that represent entire seasons of human labor and the food security of families living on extremely thin margins. In areas like the Laikipia Plateau in Kenya, the Chobe area of Botswana, the communal lands bordering Hwange National Park in Zimbabwe, communities whose livelihoods depend entirely on what they can grow are losing crops to elephants year after year, driving a hostility that makes conservation messaging feel, from inside those communities, like a cruel joke told by people who do not have to live with the consequences. Elephants kill people, not often, measured against the total human population, but with enough regularity, particularly in areas where elephants and humans share the same water sources and the same corridors of movement, that the fear is rational and the grief is real. In Tanzania, estimates suggest that elephants kill between 200 and 300 people per year. In India, where Asian elephants share densely populated landscapes with 1 billion people, the number is higher. And people kill elephants. Retaliatory killings after crop raids or human deaths, poisoning of water sources, spearing, and always, relentlessly, the commercial ivory trade, which despite international bans, continues to drive poaching at levels that threaten population viability in multiple range states. The solutions to this are not simple, and they are not cheap, and they require a kind of sustained, collaborative attention across governments, conservation organizations, local communities, and the broader global public that has been difficult to organize and maintain. But they exist. They are being tested and implemented in a growing number of places, and some of them are working. Beehive fences, simple barriers made of connected beehives strung around the perimeters of agricultural fields, have been shown to reduce elephant crop raids by over 80% in multiple studies across Kenya and Tanzania. Elephants are genuinely afraid of bees. The tiny insects can sting the sensitive skin inside the trunk, around the eyes, and inside the ears, causing pain intense enough to deter even the largest bull. A fence of connected beehives, strung on wire so that elephants attempting to push through, activate the hives and release the bees, provides a deterrent that is low cost, sustainable, and that also generates honey income for the farming communities that maintain them. Chili peppers, which elephants find intensely aversive, are used in similar ways. Mixtures of dried chili and motor oil applied to string barriers around fields, or chili bombs, cloth bags filled with dried chili ash that can be thrown at approaching elephants, are cheap, non-lethal deterrents that give farming communities agency in managing encounters. Mobile phone-based early warning systems, connecting ranger stations and conservation organizations with farming communities through SMS alerts triggered by GPS-collared elephants moving toward agricultural areas, allow farmers to protect their fields before the elephants arrive, rather than after the damage is done. Community conservancies, pioneered in places like northern Kenya, where local communities hold title to the land and manage wildlife on it as a resource rather than a threat, with direct financial benefit from wildlife tourism going into community funds, have produced dramatic results. In the areas covered by the Northern Rangelands Trust, which now spans more than 40 community conservancies across northern Kenya, wildlife populations, including elephants, have increased substantially. Human-wildlife conflict incidents have decreased. The communities that border the conservancies have measurably better health, education, and economic outcomes than comparable communities outside the system. The principle underlying all of these approaches is the same one that has driven successful conservation everywhere it has been achieved. People protect what they have reason to value. An elephant that is a threat to your harvest and your family is an animal you will kill when you get the chance. An elephant that is the reason tourists come to your conservancy and pay fees that fund your children's school is an animal you will actively protect. This is not idealism. It is documented reality, playing out in the ledgers and the wildlife counts and the community health surveys of places that have committed to getting it right. The bull elephant that followed that Land Cruiser for 4 hours across Kruger's Lowveld did not know any of this. He was not making a statement about conservation policy or community coexistence or the future of his species in a human-dominated world. He was doing what elephants do, moving through a landscape according to a logic shaped by his biology and his memory, and whatever drove him, in that particular afternoon's long heat, to lock onto that particular vehicle and follow it until something stopped him. But he was also, in the most immediate and physical possible way, making the same point that all these numbers and studies and conservancies make in their slower and more abstract way. He was making the point that elephants are not a manageable background feature of the African landscape. They are not decorations. They are not the passive subjects of human decisions about what land is worth protecting and how much money it generates and whose interests matter more. They are individuals, with memories and motivations and a relationship to the world that we are only beginning to adequately understand. They have been on this planet in their current form for far longer than our species has existed in ours. They have survived ice ages and continental drift and the rise and fall of human civilizations and the catastrophic violence of 2 centuries of commercial hunting, and they are still here, still moving through the same ancient landscapes, still navigating a world that is becoming less hospitable to them by the decade, still raising their young and mourning their dead, and navigating the complex social architecture of their family groups with the quiet, ancient intelligence of beings who have had a very long time to learn how to be what they are. The guide who drove that Land Cruiser that afternoon went back to work the next day. He has been back in the park every week since. He has seen other elephants, hundreds of them, in the years of his work. He has been in encounters that tested his skills and his nerve, and he has managed them all with the competence that his experience has given him. But he has also said to anyone who has asked that something shifted for him that afternoon, not his love of elephants, not his commitment to the work, not his belief in the importance of what parks like Kruger are trying to do. Something else. His certainty, which he had carried for 22 years of work in the bush, that he understood the terms of the relationship between humans and elephants, that he knew where the boundaries were, what the rules were, how the encounter would unfold if he managed it correctly. What that bull took from him, over 4 hours of relentless, deliberate following, was the comfortable assumption that he was the one setting the terms. That is not a comfortable thing to have taken from you. It is also, perhaps, an important thing to lose. Because the elephants were here before us, and they remember more than we have given them credit for, and they are navigating a world we have made increasingly difficult for them, with a resilience and intelligence that continues to exceed what we thought we knew. The least we can offer in return is the honesty of recognizing that the relationship between our species and theirs is not one we control as fully as we have always assumed, and perhaps that recognition, uncomfortable as it is where something better between us can begin. In the days after the encounter, park rangers returned repeatedly to the area where the bull had been seen. They deployed camera traps at the waterhole and along several of the main game trails in the surrounding area. They noted his tracks on 3 separate occasions in the first week, each time heading away from the roads, deeper into the reserve, toward water sources that see less vehicle traffic. On the 8th day, a ranger following up on a camera trap check saw him. He was standing at the edge of a small seasonal pan, a shallow depression filled with the last water of the dry season, drinking, alone, as bull elephants often are. His temporal glands had dried, the secretion was no longer running,